Hello and welcome back to another Hallowoods weekly Q&A behind the scenes live stream backstage hangout affair. Thank you so much for tuning in as always, not only to these behind the scenes featurettes, but also to the show itself week to week. We are rapidly approaching the end of season 4 and it gets closer every week that I say it. At this point, there are 4 episodes left in season 4, and that is going to quickly bring us to a close for this chapter of the story, which is a very interesting place to be. Definitely, it is the point where a lot of the many last weeks and months of work is kind of coming to fruition in one way. But then also at the same time, as we are beginning to look at what season 5 looks like and setting up for kind of the next continuation here, a lot of planning ahead and work in scouting out what is coming down the lane as well. And we are not planning for very long season break. It will essentially be more of a brief breath than a pause, than a full-on break, because as far as I'm aware at this time, we'll still be aiming to cut only a couple weeks between seasons and then jump right back into season 5 for a Halloween premiere, which is a lot of work to do in a short time, on top of getting these episodes done. And lots of real world commitments also piling on at the same time. So there's a good amount of stuff in the air at any given time. There's also some other side projects and things like getting our merch situation overhauled and getting new options and new merch patterns out there. That just requires that little extra bit of illustrating time and work throughout the weeks as well to set up infrastructure and get things running. So there's a lot of effort happening behind the scenes right now, and a lot of trying to budget time just to get every aspect of season 4 merch and other side projects and season 5's planning all undergone at the same time. On top of that, as usual, 100 Eyes in the Dark is still in its sort of publishing industry area of work, which frankly is where probably 80, I mean, if you're looking at the time required to make a book, I feel like it's 40% writing the book behind the scenes where no one can see it, 40% waiting for it to get represented and shopped around and arranging publishing details and other stuff that is clerical in nature and still behind the scenes. And then 20% the actual stuff that you can share outside of, sending advanced reader copies and getting blurbs and publishing dates and opening up for pre-orders and all that stuff that people can actually see when it comes to like getting a book done. That said, I'm still very excited to get that out as soon as possible. So with that said, we are rolling into this next season very rapidly as fall begins to descend here in Nova Scotia. And so I do look forward both to closing out this season and getting kind of the button on it, I suppose, in terms of the story that I'm looking for. And then also just surging ahead into the next period of the podcast and the next period of the work behind it. So in terms of these Q&As, if you're watching this in the present, you have a special privilege, which is the ability to ask questions in the present that get answered on the stream. Anywhere, if you click over to the YouTube side, I believe, there's a text box, text chat on the side of this video. Feel free to stick any questions in there that you might want to see answered, and I will go through and answer them. That said, we do also have 2 questions, maybe 3 questions, in the patrons ask box, which all the show patrons have access to. So I will work through those first, and then I'll turn to anything in the chat that there is. If you are watching this in the far and distant future, well, thanks for stumbling upon this recording. There's no further hope for you, but there probably are other Q&As that I'll I'll host for future seasons that might also have similar privileges. That said, our first question this week comes from Naomi. Naomi says, "Hello, I have two slightly related questions, which are the best kind. One, and I think this might get into some season 4 spoilers, so heads up. Which new season 4 character were you most looking forward to introducing to the story?" This is a tricky one, because there were a couple. I think I have in a file or a notebook somewhere here a set of character illustrations when it was still in the early stages of mapping out sort of the major players for season 4. And I believe on that sheet are Shank, Shelby, Detective Clementine, and the Quartet. And all of those were, I knew ahead of time that some elements of season 4 were going to kind of shift, that there was going to be this sort of gap in time between it and the last season, that there was going to be kind of this new age. I wanted to start out with what seemed like a fairly fresh cast of characters, and then give them sort of center stage, and then as time went on, begin to understand a little bit or relearn where the characters we know and love have ended up in the modern age. And so that was the understanding going into it, but it wasn't until beginning to sketch out like character designs and just throwing things around for what could exist in this day and age and kind of this different era, that a couple of these character concepts began to land. And I think out of them, Shank was definitely the one I was the most stoked about. A lot, it's not quite research maybe, but I ended up watching a lot of horror movies in order to like get the kind of explore the horror movies that I hadn't seen before, in order to explore a little bit more of the kind of archetypes and like history that particular character has. And so I think I've been now through all of the Friday the 13th film series of 10 films, which goes to some wild places, including space. But there were some things that I really loved about that series, and I think of it very fondly. I think we watched maybe one of the Michael Myers films. Those were a little more. I can't explain what the difference is, except that Michael Myers is a little bit more. I don't know. Maybe a little less sympathetic, a little bit more mean-spirited. By the end of getting through the entire Friday the 13th film series, the titular killer of these films is Jason, who is this hulking undead monster with a hockey mask over kind of a swollen neck, usually carrying a machete or some other kind of large, heavy weapon. And he is symbolic of a trope that you see in a couple different horror franchises. He is the kind of the masked slasher epitome. Michael Myers is very similar, but with that like William Shatner Halloween mask instead. And there are a few more that kind of live in that trope. But in going through all of those, eventually you find, at least for Mr. Voorhees, that eventually he kind of has his rules and parameters, and he has his little cut of the lake. That's his, childhood summer camp spot. It's the lake where he sleeps in most of the time. And as long as you don't go trying to have a frivolous summer party on the shore of the lake that he sleeps in, then he's content to just sort of rest eternal. He only wakes up and has to commit violence when people throw parties next to his sleeping spot. Um, and through a series of deaths and constant resurrections, he mostly just kind of has his own little core principles. And he does go on murder sprees when people violate his space, but otherwise, he's pretty much content to be left in the woods. And so I really enjoyed that, getting to watch and research and learn a little bit more about that particular archetype. And a lot of that spirit did, I think, show through in Shank. I also caught a film that it is be warned, one of the more violent horror films you'll ever see. But it is called In a Violent Nature. This was an indie film fairly recently that played off the sort of Jason Friday the 13th tropes in at the same time, very familiar and yet a very sort of novel way. And they also showed just a little glimpse of the kind of a sensitivity to the beast that is the killer in that film. And so I really enjoyed packaging these inspirations and trying to figure out where they would look and where they would fit into the Hallowoods take on everything. And so Shank, I think, was one of the first characters that was really cooked up for season 4. A lot of kind of horror movie history that I hadn't done yet or done in the same way, kind of got to find an avenue in him. And there's a couple of other genres that we also hit in season 4 that I don't think we'd really visited yet. But Shank was definitely a character that I was really going to enjoy writing, and hopefully the audience would as well. So that was high on the list. There are a couple of others that I think initially I wasn't as sure what to make of them, and then as the writing has gotten going, I've just really enjoyed their arc across the season. And that's true for Clementine. It's true for Shelby. It's especially true for Vincent and Voltaire, because I'm not sure they existed prior to writing the scene that they show up in. But then, just there's been some surprises in the writing of the season. And that is one of the things that you have to kind of learn to accept about this particular form of storytelling, or at least the method that I do it, which is telling it at the same time that I'm writing it, is that you're going to find some surprises along the way. And that you generally have a very, through a glass darkly idea of what the end of the season will look like, but you don't always know the specifics or how characters will rise and fall or how the action is going to play out in detail until you start reaching those points in the story. So it is 50% planned ahead and 50% sort of discovered along the way as you tell a story like this. So that said, Naomi also asks, in season 4, almost all of the characters who appeared in previous seasons, I guess, full disclosure, we are to the end of season 4 now, just about. I feel like this question probably does tap into kind of post-current as well. Again, just be warned for spoiler purposes. I'll try to keep it light. In season 4, almost all of the characters who appeared in previous seasons have been reintroduced in new places or contexts, or they've changed in some way. I was wondering if there were any character reintroductions or reveals that you were particularly excited about writing / seeing audience reactions to, and if there are any characters whose new arcs you were / are especially looking forward to exploring. This is a great question. This is also a very complicated question. So yes, that is one of the main, I think the question for a lot of folks is why Why did we do this? Like, why did we introduce this gap of time between seasons? Why did we like pick up with at least as the first few episodes would make you think, a new cast of characters? And the answer lies a lot in this, that there are a couple of directions you can take when it comes to a story this long. Um, and one avenue would be, kind of staying in our same day and age and minute by minute continuing along with the pace and the action for these characters. And, as we do throughout seasons 1 through 3, the challenge with this is that characters have if I ascribe to that, if a character is written well, they have a journey to go on. And so the question that happens when you reach the end of that journey is, what is next? And so seasons 1 through 3 of the Hallowoods carries a trek and evolution and a personal journey for a lot of its characters. And although it's a journey that is in some ways cut short just before it's supposed to end, it is a lot in some ways that like you want to avoid a situation where you've brought a character to the end of their journey or the end of their trek, and then they are still sticking around and around and around and either becoming monotonous or regressing their character development to go back to something that still gives you more interest. And you see both of those in various places in stories. And so the other danger for a show like this, that is at the end of season 4, 140 episodes, and then it'll be 170 by the end of season 4. So another danger that I see out ahead when it comes to a show that is potentially 10 seasons long, is that if you keep that thing going for 10 years and you keep delivering kind of more of the same, as a creator, you get exhausted and kind of tired of the same. You want to avoid repeating yourself, I guess. Avoid doing the same thing that you've done already. But another is that the audience also doesn't want to hear you do the same thing that you've done already. They may think they do. They may at times miss the familiarity of it. But in reality, if you keep serving the same dish 100, 200, 300 times, eventually people, I think, tune out or begin to get bored, or maybe wish that even though this is the safe and familiar and same format, the interest can die off. So this only shows up when you're looking at a story that is years long in scope, but this is a story that is years long in scope. So there are occasionally, I think, as we're going to see, the Hallowoods is not a story that stays static. It will reinvent itself from time to time. It will undergo evolutions from time to time. And in the end, I hope, paint a picture of something that is kind of huge and years long and multi-generational, and talks more about a community changing over time, or the consequences of actions carrying out through years to come, rather than just a granular follow through one character's perspective. Although we do have certain through lines in Thinking Nick and other narrators. But that said, one of the reasons for this skip then is that it allows me to keep characters from these past 3 seasons that we know and love, but to shift their archetypes a little bit, to shift where they sit in the story. And so characters that once had one purpose and one journey and have completed it or gone as far as it can go, are now on a different path. that's a new path, and one that makes sense for them being years older and years later, and kind of gives them a new place in the world as it continues to change, as a result of what went down in the first 3 seasons. So for me, the chance to kind of change the landscape of the story or explore how the world has changed in the years since the passing of season 3, that meant a chance to really see the consequences of those stories play out in the world in real time, to show how things have developed and how things have changed as a result. But then also how that's affected people, and affected the lives that we knew in those stories. Um, so I'm really have enjoyed, in many cases this season, getting to revisit someone that we know, and there is both a sense of familiarity there because it's a character that we have history with, but at the same time getting to explore something new about them, and kind of where they're a little bit of a different, I guess, path or direction or purpose than they had, back during the previous seasons. And so that lends to me a sense of novelty and a lot of fun in getting to meet these people again and see how they've changed and how the years have treated them. So that definitely lends some writing excitement on my end. Hopefully, it's lent some on the listening as well. But that is a little of the logic that's gone behind it. As to particular characters that, I've been excited to see back, Violet and Byrne, absolutely. I think most people were just happy they're still alive. But Clementine, obviously, she has a pretty. This was a case where Clementine doesn't have a lot of time in season 3. And it's largely because of the awareness that she would get more time here now later. And so, for a bit of season 3, there are some characters left home that don't get their due, probably. But so that later on, as we spend more time in the next 3 seasons, that we'll get to focus on them a little bit more and spend a lot more face time with them, pretty much. For the rest of Naomi's question, I can't completely speak to this because the season ain't done. There's more stuff to do, both in the end of season 4 and in season 5. So I would say there are several characters I've been really happy to reintroduce already, or just kind of see where they've ended up in this current time period. Violet and Byrne, absolutely. Big Mikey, absolutely. Even Stitchery Pins, really enjoy. But I look forward to continuing to explore that a little bit more. Also, although they don't get much spotlight time this season, beyond like a couple scenes, but I really enjoy Russell and Arnold as a pair of slightly they're not the greatest groundskeepers the Scout Post has ever had. They are doing their best, but just having them in the background, working on the groundskeeping heritage, and the rapport between them, has been a lot of fun. But yes, there are, as time goes on and we begin to soak into the more of the season, obviously there are more. Just as we keep exploring the world in the current day and age, we're going to keep running into familiar faces that are up to other stuff in the present day. So I'm excited for all of those and where they're leading. That said, we do have a question in the chat. Oh, we have. Okay. I will get to the last question in the Patrons Ask box, but it's not much of an answer. This is a very spoilery question, so keep your ears shut if you haven't caught up with the latest 2 or 3 episodes. Lizard asks, how clear of an idea do you have of what Ghost Riot is saying in the scenes where we can't hear her. Do you have her lines fully scripted or just a vague notion? You'll never know. We'll only know by context clues, won't we? We'll never know. Probably, if there is a thought, it lives entirely in the head of the author and nowhere on paper, which is the worst place for those things to live. Beanie in the chat says, hello, do you have any characters / story aspects that you wish you could have expanded more on, but weren't able to? At the same time, yes and no. Because on the one hand, there were a lot of characters that I wanted, especially in season 3. I am elbowing for screen time for all of the characters that we have on the go. There's the awareness that after season 3, like that is, there's going to be this change in time periods coming up. So we're not going to get time to like hang out with everyone exactly the way that they are now. And so there is definitely a lot of elbowing for space. There are definitely storylines that have gotten shifted out to other avenues. And so I will talk a little bit about some of those. But the other answer is that on the flip side, the story isn't done and there's a lot of it left to do. So a lot of the things that I wish could have gotten screen time in season 3 or were alternate plot lines that I had going on that I was thinking about. Like a lot of that is just going into future seasons. So there will be some things that were missed or minimized or I would have liked to spend more on, but at the same time, I still probably will get to make most of those cakes and eat them too later on in the story. I think a couple of those that stand out from season 3, Rick Rounds, for instance, has a very interesting kind of path and trajectory. But as he goes on, we kind of get a I feel like there was an important keynote from his story. And I was just looking and looking for the right place for it to happen. And it ended up happening in the My Love from the Moormire Valentine's Day card collection, which is just like a collection of, I think, 5 Valentine's Day cards and like 5 little short stories. It's a tiny, tiny document. It's available, I think, on the Patreon website for a buck or 3. But it's like, strangely enough, a line that I really wanted to do and explore with him kind of ended up being the material for that getting written. That's not to say we won't probably get more Rick Rounds in the future or get to explore it a different way. But I was surprised to find that coming out for that avenue. All through season 3, and there's a point in season 3 where Grug the Froglin, freshly blessed by Lolg Malolg and given bigger, better legs so he can walk on land, now essentially a swole Froglin, appears in an unexpected place. And the audience was just bewildered by the sudden appearance of Grug, of all people. And it was mostly that almost all of his storyline that season was relegated just for space reasons to the bonus Drabbles. So Grug in the Drabbles, in the 100-word bonus stories that come out every week, has a full journey where he gets commissioned by Lolg Malolg to go north and interfere with what's going to happen up there. He goes on this journey. He goes through the forest. He, misses several threats. I think he gets seen en route during the Cats episode. And then that all culminates to him being in the place where he is when he actually shows up in the main story. But if you didn't read any of the bonus stories, then you wouldn't be aware that he's had any time this season. So he does just miraculously appear. And that was one of those things where it was kind of funny in retrospect that, for 95, 98, 99% of the audience, the context for what this character has been up to lives in a material they haven't seen. There are some other storylines that I think over the last couple seasons of the show, I would have loved to dive a little bit more into at the time. Oswald Big Botulus's space race, the details of the stone made ins and outs inside the dreaming boxes, Ray and Moth's continued adventures, especially in the wake of leaving Box Andromeda, then everything that happens after that, then there are at least months of separation, and then their reunion eventually. There are a number of things that I would love to have gotten a little bit more time to dive into. Really, the journeys of any character who is named but then left behind on the Northmost trip. But that said, as I mentioned before, a lot of these things are not things that won't get written. They're just things that haven't graced the story yet. They definitely will at some point. So there's a lot to come in these future seasons, and a hope not to leave any big untended threads when it comes to our story. I will also say I think a lot of especially the returning characters, it's not so much necessarily that we find them at the end of their journey years later, but that we find them now at the start of a different journey for their character that we will have to kind of see evolve and change and navigate challenges with over the seasons to come. So we definitely have some growth to do when it comes to even characters who are returning from a legacy trip. So that will probably bring us to the end of our Q&A today. Thank you so much, everyone who submitted questions. Thank you so much, Beanie, in the chat. And I hope to catch you next time. In the meantime, enjoy the coming episodes of Hello from the Hallowoods, and stay tuned for the end of season 4, rolling week to week, and of season 5 coming soon to a Halloween near you. Take care, everyone.